Okay, very good. So, as John was saying that, I'm part of the APIX. Now it's called ASCM. And I think most of us were kind of smaller entities of the larger APIX. You used to be called chapters. Now some of the chapters are becoming forums. Some of them are fighting hard to stay as chapters, despite all the challenges and struggles and adversities thrown at us, right? So, still trying to promote supply chain education. So thanks for everyone's support, and thank you for attending this webinar. In fact, I think the Danbury folks that, approached me just like, I think a few weeks ago, asking me if I could present. And, we have all heard about sales and operations planning. But I think we decided that we will change the last word now to execution, right? We just need to plan. We also need to execute. So, so this is becoming a trendy, hotter topic over the last, I would say, few years, 3, 4, 5 years. In fact, I see my colleague, Jane Ehrenberg, attending the webinar today. And, he is one of those guys who used to run this several years ago when it was not hot. So, and I used to have a process when I was a director at Gillette, Procter & Gamble, that did something close to this, but we didn't call it SNOE either, right? And I have had several debates, discussions on LinkedIn, when I think some of the older folks, people, a little older than me, had questioned me or questioned everybody else. Why call it SNOE? We should just it's really SNOE is the new name for master production scheduling, right? So we've had master production scheduling and master production schedule for, I don't know, I think master production schedule is older than S&OP, right? So that has been around for like almost 70, 80 years. Older than demand planning, older than S&OP, older than anything we know of, right? Even before the advent of computers. So that's the debate people have. So SNOE, and I'm just going to talk about SNOE here. It's sales and operations execution. In fact, when I just gave the abstract, I didn't really give any graphic, and my friend John took it upon himself to put a graphic together. So in fact, I actually borrowed that and added as one of the slides here. So SNOE and execution and short-term planning has assumed a lot of importance more recently, especially given the pandemic, in terms of the, over the last 2 to 3 years. And it may continue for a while, given the pandemic has become an endemic. And given the way the world has reacted to it. In fact, I presented a paper on the supply chain new world order recently to one of the chapters in New Jersey, I believe. Princeton chapter. So a lot of changes have happened, right? The governments have reacted in a specific way, people have reacted in a specific way, and companies are reacting in a different way. So we all know that there is a lot of uncertainty here. There is, unexpected demand, spiky, surging demand, and then supply shortages, because of challenges across the board. Even people taking off from work, people refusing to work, even in China, right? So that has created labor issues everywhere and across the board, from people who are on the factory floor to people who are loading containers to, people on the port. So we have a number of issues. And now as a supply chain, we have to address all these issues and deal with all these issues on a very short notice. So execution is the key. I mean, we can put all the plans together, but even the best laid plans may have problems because, we have to be nimble enough to change them. That's one of the reasons why the execution has become a key, right? So sales and operations execution is a short-term execution model to review and revise plans holistically. That's the most important thing, right? Not in silos, but holistically, so that we can manage the risk and provide continuous update to the plans. In fact, actually, corporate supply chains have kind of started on this path several years ago with some of these initiatives called real-time S&OP. People used to call real-time S&OP. Demand sensing has become, is also, grown in popularity, where, people just look at sense demand almost on an everyday basis. So before we jump into this, I think briefly about us. We used to be called Demand Planning LLC. We are rebranded as Valtitude since 2019. We are a boutique consulting firm based in Boston. We have offices in India and Southeast Asia. So Valtitude is our new name. And primarily we focus on two things: strategy consulting in primarily supply chain areas and sales planning and revenue management. Given our original background has been in the forecasting area, in sales forecasting, revenue management, sales planning, and technology implementation of supply chains, right? So usability consulting to re-engineer SCM implementations. We have also done custom software that we build for smaller clients, especially when the large footprint software either is out of reach or doesn't fit the bill, right? So that's what we do, just in a nutshell. And one more pitch about our company: we specialize, as I said, in SCM consulting, S&OP, IBP, SNOE, and what we do is all kind of backed by our expertise in analytics and predictive analytics and design, right? So basically, we do a lot of quantitative work, but we also bring that quantitative work into developing solutions. Okay, so that's the 1-minute pitch of the company that I work for, and I've been with Valtitude. I started the company back in 2004. So with that, let's talk about MPS, right? MPS. Basically, John gave me the slide. In fact, he was, he put it as one of the graphics for promoting the webinar for the Danbury Forum. And interestingly, John, I have to tell you this though, you didn't mention SNOE at all here, right? I think you went to the old school and said, hey, master production scheduling is the limelight right here, right? So, which is good. You were pitching SNOE, but you were just kind of saying, hey, it's MPS. Yeah, it's good. I agree with you. So if you think about it, overall, some of you folks from, I don't know, I don't want to call out, but maybe 80s, 90s, essentially you have the corporate business planning, then you have, S&OP, sales and operations planning, which kind of acts as a bridge between tactical planning and the integrated long-term business planning. So that sits in the middle. And then you have the master production schedule, which in fact makes it a reality, makes the S&OP a reality, right? Makes the plan, the demand plan and the S&OP a reality by bringing this and breaking this down into executable parts that can be used by different supply chain functions, right? Master production schedule should drive the supply chain, every supply chain, in fact, right? Because it is the document, it is the Bible for the supply chain that essentially says, hey, this is what you do, every function, this is how many trucks you need, how much warehouse capacity you need, how many people you need in the transportation department, the warehouse department, how much raw materials you need to produce, and how many machines we need, right? So the MPS has the answer, or should have the answer, for everything, especially everything supply chain related, right? So MPS is the execution vehicle for the S&OP, right? But so over the years though, right? So basically S&OE, sits right there, right? It is really master production scheduling executed, basically, holistically executed. So we can think about it in two ways, right? One is S&OE is a streamlined process. I'll talk about that a little bit. Second is you can just say, hey, S&OE, is it maybe MPS in a glorified way? Maybe, because I think we need a new energy here, because the way I had seen, I have consulted for several companies in the last 20 years. and I have seen how some of these processes work, or some of these processes have degenerated and not worked, right? And in fact, actually, you could say something about MPS, right? So, so I think MPS, we talked about it, mother of all plans. MPS holds the key to the entire resource planning process when it comes to supply chain. But in practice, maybe some of you have a very effective working MPS process, so which means you don't need SNOE. You're already doing SNOE, right? But in practice, the MPS has been relegated to just a document, right? MPS is not master production scheduling anymore. It's master production schedule, which is, it's a document. It's an Excel sheet. So that arrives by email for different parties to do their part. And I have seen this work often in a silo, right? Production planners do their own thing based on the MPS, plan schedulers do their own thing. Warehouse operations, sometimes they even ignore MPS and they say, hey, we know exactly what will happen, how much volume we get today, by day of the week. They have their own forecasting and they execute that way. And in fact, they turn out to be right too sometimes. So now this has been a challenge because, what happens is they're all executing the plan, the MPS, but until the MPS is revised, they do their own thing based on the MPS. So when there are disruptions in your everyday activity, when you are trying to fulfill the customer, when you have these unexpected demand surges or supply issues, the way you react is just siloed, right? It is not holistic. It is not communicated. That's where SNOE comes in, right? John will have some time for question and answers later on, right?
Yes, we will.
Okay. So basically, when you have, right, I think overall, if you look at it, you have the S&OP, the MPS, and then you have all of this operational planning, forecasting, and scheduling taking place. In fact, this is a chart that is borrowed and modified from Wallace and Stahl. So when you have demand supply imbalances, then the system goes, it becomes chaotic, right? So there is fragmented functional execution. So people actually just kind of react in their own way, they act in their own way, and all of these come in and cause a little bit of chaos until the MPS is reset again. So now I have seen companies do different things, right? So because of what is happening here, I have seen companies, what they do is they actually have the demand planning group come up with a new demand plan every week or every day. In fact, I don't think demand planning should be such a short-term process either. And they may even go to the extent of revising the MPS, every day almost, right? So that is their action saying, hey, now we just know these things have changed. Now we are going to just change the plan. So instead of executing holistically, what you're doing now is you are taking the plan, the MPS, which runs maybe it's the next 13 weeks, 26 weeks, what have you. You reset and revise it every day, right? So now you are not planning anymore, right? You are just more reacting, but then you have compromised the plan itself. Okay. John, I think there is a chat message. In case if there is a question, you could just tell me, okay?
Yeah, it's a comment from Rick. I love it. The MPS essentially is the framework of SNOE, and a strong master scheduler is like a quarterback leading the team or a maestro. Well said.
Great, thank you. So what is the need for SNOE, right? Now, basically, again, this is another chart I borrowed. I do need to give proper credit. I was lazy not doing this, but I have used this chart in many of my workshops. So you are all familiar, some of the old folks are very familiar with this chart, right? So if you think about it, the chaotic and fragmented execution of the MPS will also have a negative effect, which would affect the monthly S&OP process, because now not only you are revising the MPS frequently, you are also, you may also draw the S&OP resources to draw, to do firefight in the short term, right? because the SNOP, who are the people that should be involved in the SNOP? It is basically senior management, right? C-level leaders, higher mid-level leaders are the ones involved in SNOP. But now, because you have this chaos happening, now they may be actually getting more focused on fighting the fires. So you have challenges here in the SNOP process itself. So it kind of backfeeds. If this thing doesn't work, right? So then it will just affect the SNOP, which is supposed to be a higher level plan. So if you think about this, right, the SNOE really covers, from the master production schedule, which is the lifeblood of the supply chain, to the demand planning and supply planning in terms of how you can have short-term initiatives that will holistically realign the demand and supply plans in the short term. Okay. So formally defining this, SNOE is a little bit more than MPS, although MPS is the key, right? It's a tactical planning process to align and balance demand and supply intersections, right? Wherever you have the demand supply intersections and interruptions or disturbances, you need a process, a planning process, and an execution process. So cross-functional, detailed planning process. Now, S&OP is also cross-functional, but here it's cross-functional at the execution level, which will involve sales, product management. Now, product management is always considered as a senior, is more on the aggregate planning, right? Product management, marketing. But now the way we go to market, we could have packaging changes, we could have product changes, these could all happen at the execution level. So product management is important as well. Demand planning, supply planning, production planning, detailed scheduling, warehousing and shipping and customer service. All of these folks are involved in executing the MPS, executing the plan. It's a weekly cycle. Every week we meet, right, to look at the next 13 weeks, right? What happens in the first week, next few weeks, and then what happens the 13th week, right? I'm just saying 13 in your company, it could be 15 weeks, 16 weeks, what have you, depending on the business, depending on the lead times. So you have to just really design this based on the needs of the company. So just don't take 13 as a magic number, because I had seen 13 as a magic number in some of the other presentations as well, right? So 13 is not magical, it could be different. But let's just stick with 13 for now. 13, the 13th week is when you have the, what do you call the jump off point, right? Because that's where the S&OP meets the MPS, right? Because things are changeable. And then you really need to give life to S&OP at that point, right? Whatever is in the aggregate plan, midterm, long-term plan should become part of the execution plan beginning the 13th week. Reviewing both unconstrained and constrained plans, right? Essentially, you have an unconstrained plan, but constrained plan is the output of the MPS. Addresses demand supply imbalance through constant interdisciplinary communication and structured meetings, basically, right? So two things are key here. One is communication, because that is something that I had seen fall out of the master scheduling practice, right? People just like take the plan, work on their own stuff. They're gone for like a week thinking about it. And then they all put that together and then say, hey, this is our supply response. And then have structured meetings on a weekly basis. What do we do, every week in terms of how do we address this? Enable execution of the S&OP plan through different things, through demand control, supply changes, and holistic readjustment of plans to address exceptions. Now, demand control is key. I don't think I'll have time to talk much about demand control. Essentially, you could think of demand sensing. So looking at demand disturbances to really assess what is causing the demand spike or demand shortfall, and going back to, the originators of demand. Who is the originator of demand? Sales, basically. So talking to sales and marketing to really understand what is causing that particular demand disruption, right? Is it something short-term or long-term? Is it organic or is it temporary? Is it a demand shift? Accordingly, you react, right? Because otherwise, if you don't really have proper demand control, a demand signal could result in a bullwhip effect, right? So because you just like see demand coming up and you just like, you're going to just say, hey, I'm going to produce and produce and produce more without knowing exactly where the demand is coming from. Is it short term or long term? Right. So similarly, you have to react to supply changes. So both of these would essentially result in a holistic readjustment of plans to address exceptions. Now that's the key. It's holistic. You're communicating, you know exactly what is happening, and you're readjusting the plan for short-term execution. And then if there is persistence, you communicate back to S&OP when they meet on a monthly basis. Hopefully your S&OP is not meeting weekly, because if your S&OP is meeting on a weekly basis, you're actually kind of hybridize the process, right? It's, I don't want to use the term, but you have kind of like compromised both S&OP and SNOE. You're kind of doing SNOE in the S&OP name. Okay, so SNOE is the bridge to S&OP. So we talk about 3 different time frames here, right? The 4-week time frame is the as-is time frame, right? So not much can be done. You can maybe rob Peter to pay Pal, right? That type of stuff. Depending on your supply chain, depending on how you're reacting. And the 4 weeks could be, in your case, 4 days, right? Because you are a very short-term supply chain. In fact, we are working now with a cafe, right? For them, 4 weeks is long-term, right? Because the commissary produces stuff every day, right? So for them, the plan is like, 1 to 2 days, essentially. So the as-is is just 1 day for them. So you have to really think about the lead time, think about your operational cycle, and then, come up with numbers that are more realistic in terms of what are the 3 different zones, right? The as-is zone, 4 weeks. Realignment zone is the next 13 weeks, right? 4 to 13, 4 and beyond, up to 13 weeks. And then you have the 4 to 18 months, which is the S&OP, right? For some of these companies, the 4 to 18 months may not be realistic. If you're a shipbuilding company or an aerospace company, your long-term is going to be, 3 to 10 years out, right? So you need to think about what these different zones are, and how does the SNOE come in, and how does it bridge to the SNOE? Okay, so I don't know why this slide is repeating it. Okay, so I do want to mention this. So SNOE has evolved to execute the MPS with a series of meetings that are aligned as part of the overall tactical process, right? So think about SNOE. If you can take away this, I think you could probably start an SNOE in your companies, right? At least to get started. So SNOE is 3 things: master production schedule, which most of you should already have, right? Unless your business is too simple, you have a master production schedule, which you already have, which is as old as the rocks, right? So we all have master production schedule. Now, execution happens through structured set of meetings on a weekly basis that has specific horizons that they should cover. 1 week, next 4 weeks, 4 to 12 weeks, 13th week, right? So we talk about different issues and what are the changes that are taking place on an every week basis, right? Obviously, every day you'll be meeting for different topics, but so you have a series of tactical meetings. And then lastly, you have live update of the schedule, right? So basically now this is something that happens based on your meetings and based on the inputs and based on changes in demand and supply, you are able to update the schedule live, right? So that's SNOE. So if you're able to do all these things, then you have the SNOE. Now, when I say live update of the schedule, you're not rerunning the MPS. You are just adjusting it based on what you know. Okay. So planning horizons and focus, right? So again, not to beat up on this a little bit, I kind of love this chart, so that's the reason why I had to put this in there. So you have the SNOE timeframe and the S&OP. Now, SNOE is not historical; it's just on the left side, right? But SNOE sits here, right? So you have in the very short term demand fulfillment at the detail level. SKU customer is important. Every order is important. So as is and tactical, right? In the first 3 or 4 weeks. There are things that you could change, like in the fulfillment process. There are resources that you could redeploy, like warehouse, transportation, those type of things you could redeploy. Even adjusting, a little bit in terms of production is possible too, right? But you can't just order raw materials differently. And then you have and then you have the midterm. This is the sweet spot between S&OP and SNOE, right? Whereas basically the bridge to S&OP. Now, S&OP, we already know, right? Mid to long-term planning, critical for production and capacity planning. So here you are looking at aggregate planning at product family, not SKU level planning, although you may have the details at the MPS, and critical for production capacity planning. So S&OP should always be focused on capacity planning, raw material planning, strategic sourcing, right? These are the things that S&OP should be focused on. And they shouldn't really reach back into the red zone, right? Which is the area for the SNOE. So make sure that, when you go back and look at S&OP processes in your company, S&OP and SNOE processes, look at the horizon, right? And look at the planning versus execution, right? And look at the level of detail, right? 3 things that we need to look at. Okay. So basically, we have SNOE and S&OP, kind of a redo of the chart before. SNOE align demand and supply at the tactical level, and it connects to the daily schedule. S&OP balancing supply and demand plans and align operations through a management decision process. So this is where senior management is involved. And bridges to the strategic plan, which is a strategic corporate plan, including financial objectives and goals. Now, over the last few years, right, I think, I would say, in fact, last 5 to 10 years, there has been kind of a merging of these two, right? And that merging is now called the IBP, Integrated Business Planning. So essentially saying, hey, instead of just having all these different initiatives, we want to make sure that when we do aggregate planning, 4 to 18 months or 24 months, looking at demand and supply, we should look at our strategic plan and financial plan and really kind of holistically merge them, right? And so, I'm not really going to talk about that now, but that has become the IBP, right? And maybe in a future version of the slide, I should probably put that in there as well. And then the SNOE bridges down to the daily plans and schedules that is being used, right? For tactical execution. So there is this constant, review, realignment that makes live update of the schedule as well. And that's what happens in the SNOE. The SNOE covers here. Okay. So let me get you a little bit more detail, right? Without, without putting you to sleep here. So we talked about the different time frames, right? So if we just get into a little bit more detail, and you may have some questions here as well. So you have week 1, which is the as-is fulfillment week, right? Flawless execution, order fulfillment, unbiased metrics, right? Metrics are key because you are almost like going to wrap up and make this week a history pretty soon. And assess impact to the next 8 weeks. There are some changes possible, but not much in week 1, right? Week 1 is execution, right? You are going to deal with fires here, right? And then you're going to just say, hey, what am I going to do? How am I going to use, do this? What I am going to do differently in the next weeks 2 to 5 compared to the plan, given what I know about the change in demand, change in supply. What do I need to do? How did I react? How did I meet my plan? And what is it going to happen? What is going to happen? How is it going to impact the next 2 to 5 weeks? So people who are responsible here, customer service, supply planners, warehouse, right? So, all of these people are involved in week 1. They are responsible, but obviously others as well, because they need to understand the impact to the execution of the remainder of the plan. Weeks 2 to 5, you could have supply shortages, unexpected changes to supply, warehouse issues, inventory availability, machine downtime, right? And these are all things that you need to react to. You need to either adjust things, you need to reshuffle your planning process, You may even just decide that you are going to not run certain things and you want to run different things, or you may just decide that you want to expedite, right? Pay overtime, what have you. So production schedulers, supply planners, warehouse. Demand volatility, week 6 to 12, right? Here, it's a little bit flexible here. So you are seeing unexpected changes to demand. Market factors, new market factors coming in. Demand sensing, that may just tell you, hey, your demand plan for the month is 20,000, but when I sense the demand, it looks like you're going to end the month with 30,000, right? You are just halfway through. What do we need to do? So here, again, demand control. Is this a demand shift or a demand growth? Organic demand growth, which would call into consideration the S&OP process for long-term view. Demand shift means basically it's a temporary issue, and how do you deal with it? So some feedback back to the sales process is important here to see if some of this demand could be realigned, right? Some orders could be made to wait. So sales, demand planning, product management is involved here. It's responsible, not involved. Everybody's involved here. And then week 13, resetting the schedule. And here is where you can flex the plans. Here is where you firm the SKU level demand plan, and and then come up with the MPS, provide demand and supply visibility. And based on what changes you have seen in the last 12 weeks, what have you, in the first 12 weeks, not last 12 weeks, first 12 weeks, you can also provide feedback to S&OP, right? So here, you have S&OP manager, master planner, demand planning, all of these people are involved. And S&OP, you know the story, unconstrained demand plan, rough cut capacity planning, and production schedules. Senior management, middle management are involved here. Okay. So, so I think I would stop here and see if we have any questions. So basically, I think, overall process flow, if you think about it, right, you have, long-term supply visibility is what starts this process, right? That is from the S&OP. And then you have the master production schedule and launch of new products, packaging, right? This is where product supply comes in, product management comes in. And then you would address supply volatility with customer prioritization, right? And then you would address demand volatility. In this case, you could even kind of flex demand a little bit short-term, order management. Demand sensing, which would just tell us like what we need to do, readjust our plans over the 6 to 12 week period. And come back with shuffling the customer fulfillment, and then decide to expedite supply to address major demand spikes. And finally, feedback to MPS and S&OP so that the S&OP, changes midterm to long-term plans. So in summary, weekly cadence, address all aspects of the execution over the next 13 weeks and report out back to S&OP. Okay. So that's the end of my presentation, 40 minutes. Any questions?